Hey everybody, it's Rick, and I wanted to thank you for joining me on another Inwyt Walkabout. I'm back from Australia in the impending northeast winter time. It's cold here. We have a threat of snow this week, but it's still a beautiful time of year even when it's gray. Let me just show you where I'm walking today. This is one of the local reservoirs near where I live, and it's just beautiful if you kind of take a moment to absorb it. And what I wanted to chat with you today about is our dependence, our reliance on tools and methodologies or steps in how we basically approach life. And I'll give you an example of mine that maybe highlights that a little bit, and that is I'm somebody who has always enjoyed photography, and I've played around with it since I was little, with basic cameras to getting sophisticated cameras and flashes and all kinds of gadgets that go along with it. And one of the things that kind of caught my interest more recently was portraits. And it wasn't so much taking, glamour shots or, fashion posing or anything like that. I was really intrigued by trying to capture just people doing normal things, everyday lives, kind of capturing people as they are, and taking good pictures in the process. And one of the things that I started to realize very quickly is that common to all photography is the importance of lighting, and in the context or in the example of portraits is posing. And it turns out that even if you're going to try to take natural pictures of people in everyday activity, you still have to focus on posing, because your camera captures a snapshot, captures an image that is just a fragment of people who are always in motion. And if you don't consider what is going to happen in that microsecond, you can get off pictures. As we all know, people have their eyes shut, or they look awkward, or they're doing something strange. And so I spent a lot of time looking for apps and books that might help guide me in how to pose effectively. How do you pose subjects? And there were apps out there, books out there that were just replete with poses, thousands of poses, hundreds of poses for different scenarios, different settings, different things that you wanted to capture. And it just became this overwhelming effort to try to say, well, which ones do I need to learn? And if I learn all of these, how am I ever going to use these in a functional way for photography, where you don't have a huge amount of time to plan? And ultimately, as I was kind of toying around with that and trying to figure out what to do, I landed on a book by a master photographer called Roberto Valenzuela, who wrote a book called Picture Perfect Posing. And he's somebody who's a professional and has spent his whole career essentially working with different portraits, of all kinds of styles. And what he basically points out in his book is essentially the message that says, don't memorize different poses, understand the principles that lie behind posing, understand movement and how different body positions and how different actions create a certain atmosphere, a certain image, a certain message, a certain story. And if you learn those principles, then you can basically create any pose you want anytime. And he wrote a book about lighting that is very similar, picture perfect lighting, where again he underscored the importance and the value of understanding the principles of light. Don't worry about flash this and lighting that, and where the sun is on a particular point of the horizon and so forth. It was just, you understand how light functions, you can use natural light, artificial light, any way you want. And you can always create a picture, an image that reflects what it is you're trying to capture, or that is just natural. So, what's the point for what we have been talking about in our walkabouts? Well, one of the things that has struck me about problem solving over the years is how dependent we are, how reliant we are on tools and methodologies. We think that, well, if we have a particular set of tools or a particular set of steps, that's going to take care of the problem. Just follow the steps. You have a tool, just plug in the tool and bingo, you're going to get the result that you want. And the fact is that, tools and methodologies are necessary and they're helpful, and you do get results. But if you look at our problems in the world and in healthcare, and how we continue to struggle with the exact same problems that we've been dealing with for decades, it's very obvious that these methodologies and these tools are not as effective as they need to be if we're going to solve these problems. And what we end up doing is we either end up saying, well, we need another set of tools, or we need an additional step, and we start pursuing courses and books and research that says, what's that extra step? What is that next additional silver bullet that we need to put into play to, knock this thing out of the park, to basically solve our problems once and for all? And I think one of the things that we're missing in our approach is we are not actually trying to understand the principles that underlie the tools that we have and why they are or not as effective as they need to be. And, if we start to look at conflict, it's kind of the same thing. You'll see over the prior sessions and as we go forward that I'm going to keep showing you examples of how conflict shows up in our daily lives, across different settings, and use of words, assumptions, all the things that we've been talking about. And I think hopefully when you start to look at that, is the goal is not to say, pick a particular thing and fix that. What we're going to ultimately start moving towards is saying, what are the common elements that sit under every single one of these examples? And can we understand the nature of conflict rather than solve specific conflicts one by one? Because you'll never, ever solve all the conflicts if you take that on, because you're just skimming the surface and you're using tools that really lack the understanding that's required to really have a uniform ability to say, I can see conflict everywhere, and because I understand it, I can also not get involved with it, and I can eliminate it. So our opportunity here is to say, let's look at conflict, and as we go forward, and as you go through your daily lives and your daily activities where you start to hit road bumps, is rather than focus on the specific cause of a conflict, is to start challenging yourself and saying, what's common to all of these different scenarios and examples, pictures of conflict as they show up. And to then recognize that conflict, the understanding of conflict, is also a core to problem solving, which we're going to get to as well. That the methodologies or the approaches that we ultimately put into place for consistency and so forth are based on understanding the nature of problems, the nature of conflict, and creating, again, sort of a platform where you say, if I understand the nature of conflict and I understand what's behind functional problems and what limits us from being able to solve them in our daily lives or at work or wherever, then you're not restricted. And you're constantly in a space where you can actually start to look at scenarios with a common ground, but also with a creative actual look at what's going on rather than trying to frame it into a model. So that's where we're headed. So that's it for today. Think about that. That's a mouthful, but I think going forward, I'm going to try to start pointing out those commonalities and start to say, can we start to look at what the nature of, again, specifically conflict is, and can we now start to pull these different examples together around the principles such that we can then start to move forward and say, okay, now we can move towards, saying, how do we solve these things? So I leave you again with just another beautiful view of the morning here. It's a little noisy because people are leaf blowing in the background. You may or may not hear that. I'm Rick. This is Inwyt Walkabout, and I will see you next time. Take care.